When we started this investigation, NXIVM was thriving. They had their main center in Albany, but they had centers in Mexico and LA and Vancouver. They had tons of students, enrollment was full, they had all kinds of workshops happening, and over the course of the investigation, we have watched this organization unravel.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment. I probably got the most special guest I could ever have on my show up to now. I have a Hollywood actress, Nicki Clyne. She's had some of her family, some of her friends sent to prison. One person with 120 years in federal prison. She's taken some backlash from the media, some from the government, and today we're bringing her on and we're going to talk about the government, the corruption, what's right and what's wrong. But I'll let Nicki introduce herself and tell you who she is and, talk about some of the things that she's done in Hollywood and stuff like that. And then we'll get into it. Nicki, introduce yourself to the people.
Okay, so I am Nicki Clyne. I started my career as an actor. I was on the hit show Battlestar Galactica, for all of those sci-fi fans out there. Very fortunate to be on such an incredible show with great writing and, just production value and asking important questions about why we're here and what happens if our technology, gets away with us and we don't create checks and balances to really control the technology and society and things like that. So I also was part of what most people know as NXIVM, which was a personal development company and has been grossly misunderstood and misrepresented in the media and some so-called documentaries. NXIVM actually wasn't even its own thing. It was an umbrella company where a number of different companies that focused on different ways to help people improve their lives, they kind of fell under, and there was a coaching company called Executive Success Programs, and that's how I got introduced to Keith Raniere and the community. And I worked on a number of projects and actually started a media business where we analyze news by showing how articles use spin and slant and logic to distort information. So even before I was the subject of a propaganda war, I understood that existed, but I will tell you that there's no amount of theory that can prepare you for reading lies about yourself in the news. Like it just, even though and it's probably the same with the government. It's like everybody knows that politicians lie, that the government is corrupt, that the media, distorts and feeds off of our kind of desire for entertainment and scandal. But to read things being said about you that are just categorically false and very disturbing and defamatory is a whole new level of, I guess they call it red pilling, in certain circles. But it was just a very big wake-up call to where we are as a society and our values, what we care about. I used to think that justice existed, and maybe it does on some cosmic level. I don't know. I won't go there, but in the sense that we have order and law and order in this country, I was very naive. I really thought that, sure, mistakes happen, injustices occur. We all see the documentaries, we read the books, we hear about people being exonerated, but I didn't know that the system is rigged. I didn't know how corrupt and rotten it really is from the core, that prosecutors care more about winning than people's lives. And so when the NXIVM story moved from being this kind of like salacious Hollywood media peg into a legal issue, that's when I really got my education in the current state of our justice system, and I was disturbed. I don't know if it would have been cheaper to go to law school or go through what I've been through, but I feel like I learned, as they say, the hard way. Just what goes on by working with a defense attorney, having friends go to prison and have to fight their case. I spent 6 months preparing to be federally indicted. So I guess that's maybe where we can start.
Yeah. You talk about injustices and stuff like that, and this is your story today, but I experienced it. I was 24 years old. I was offered a plea for 11 years. Because I didn't take the plea, I was given what was called the trial penalty. I went to trial and I was sentenced to 40 years at the age of 24. So I know what it is to experience injustice. And I can only imagine, your friends are getting arrested, they're getting indicted, and you're thinking, wow, the federal government's probably going to indict me, because you're starting to learn that, hey, they don't always play fair, right?
Right. So when they first, I was actually there for both Keith Ranieri's arrest, which was actually in Mexico, more of a kidnapping because he wasn't properly extradited, as well as with Allison when the FBI agents came for her. And I was, savvy enough that I didn't say much to the federal agents who showed up. It was a very awkward experience because I'm a people person. I'm friendly, and one showed up, and I was outside going to move the car, and he's like, I thought he was a journalist. So I was like, he's like, are you Nicki Clyne? And I'm like, I'm not talking to you. And he's like, showed me his badge and said, you're not going anywhere. And I was scared. I went into fight or flight, but then the other part of me was like, so how long have you been in the FBI? Like, I didn't know what to say. I was just making small talk. It was the most surreal experience. But I remember saying, look, you don't know the truth. All I want is that you pursue this fairly, that you follow due process, because the story and the narrative that's been spun is not accurate. And people's lives are already being destroyed in the media. And certainly, this is going to make it worse, but all I want is, if I will happily speak to you as long as this is treated fairly. And they were like, yeah, we want to talk to you. Thank goodness I hired a good defense attorney who didn't let me speak to them, because I know people who did, who had different types of lawyers, more like negotiators. Like there's the lawyers who are just really good at negotiating plea deals, and then there's trial lawyers who fight. I thank goodness I had one of those.
So you were never federally indicted, right?
I wasn't.
But you lived with that fear for, a long time, obviously, right?
Yeah, so, my lawyer used to say, when you get that knock at 6 a.m. So every morning I would wake up kind of in a panic, having, dreams and imagining what could happen, and check the time. And if it was like 7, I would relax. I'd be like, okay, well, it didn't happen today.
So let's talk a little bit about Keith, right? So Keith is sentenced to what, 120 years?
120 years in a case with no violence, no drugs, no actual sex. No one even accused him of yelling. It's the most absurd, crazy thing you can imagine.
So you're a Hollywood actress, you have your career, your friend goes to trial. Are you thinking at the time, now I'm asking you this from a different standpoint before you actually knew, what goes on in the system. Because now that you've experienced, because the average person would think, their justice is real, they really do follow the rules, and, all too often they do not. Yeah. So while he's going to trial, he ends up getting convicted. Were you shocked when the jury came back with a guilty verdict?
So They delayed him going to trial, even though his lawyers kept pushing for a speedy trial, which is a right he's entitled to, because of the other co-defendants and the complexity of the case and the fact that the government brought this bullshit superseding indictment. It delayed the case over a year. So during that time, I learned a lot more about how things work, and I learned, the plea deal process. And what happened was, after the superseding indictment, which included a charge that was awful, it was child pornography.
Yeah.
Okay. And, it's since been discovered by multiple forensic experts that the hard drive that they allege was Keith's had been tampered with, that the dates on the photos, which is what they used to prove the age of the woman in the photos, were manipulated, and a number of other issues. Even at trial, the FBI agent who testified about the hard drive and the camera card said that the chain of custody was broken, that it showed up in an unsealed bag, and that the contents were manipulated while in FBI custody by an unknown person. So that should have been enough to throw it out, but due to the amount of hate, of prejudice, of the judge, how he was in this case, it wasn't. So put that aside. When that charge came out, like, his co-defendants, these are, one's an actress, one's a suburban mom, the businesswoman. There's all these people who've never dealt with the law except for maybe a speeding ticket, and they probably pay it. They don't know how this works, and their lawyers, I'm sure, advised them that there's no chance going to trial with Keith is going to work out. And they were probably right. I mean, the amount of prejudice that had built up at that point in the media, Keith was guilty. They didn't need to have a trial. And then the trial, they introduced all sorts of evidence that was totally irrelevant and unrelated, but it was just to dirty him up and make him look like a monster. So all of that is to say, I wasn't shocked. I had learned enough at that point about how these things work and the forces against him. And I wasn't super confident with his defense team. I didn't feel that they really did their due diligence to understand who Keith is, what the community was about, the psychologies of the witnesses and why they might be saying what they're saying and things like that. So it was shocking in the sense that this whole thing has been completely surreal. Like, I still kind of can't believe that this is my life. Yeah. But I also understood that it was rigged from the beginning.
Maybe you should have went to law school, because you talk good. Chain of custody, there's a due process violation here. There's probably a Fourth Amendment violation. And what you talk about is what's commonly referred to as bad guy evidence. Just pile it onto the jury. This guy's a bad guy, so convict him. Get him out of the community. Look at all these bad things he's done to these women, and he's lied to them, and he's manipulated them. And that's their story, right? And
it's interesting, like, one of their star witnesses, who was someone who was a trainer in executive success programs, one of my best friends, her testimony really created a lot of prejudice because she had so much authority because of her relationship with Keith. But when you really break down her accusations, all she's basically saying is that he was a bad boyfriend. Like, it's not the complaint, like, there was nothing criminal about her accusations against him, and her sentencing memo that just came out is really the same thing. Like, it sounds bad because it's so emotional, and he made promises that he didn't keep, and such and such. And there are things that I was there for that I know are being distorted and told differently than how it happened. But even if you believe what's being said, they're not crimes.
Nicki, this isn't the first time that the government's done stuff like this to people. Have you ever read the Ruby Ridge book?
No, what's that?
How about Waco, Texas? You never...
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, so, like, Ruby Ridge, the government went in there. The guy had pieces of a gun that he sold. It was a misdemeanor, a federal misdemeanor. And they went in there and they killed his family, shot his wife while she was holding their baby, newborn baby. The things in Waco, Texas. I mean, the government sometimes just drums these things up. And, you know, I hate to say it this way, but good thing it didn't end in people getting shot and killed, you know?
I know.
Seriously, because
I know.
people don't realize it. And I'm not some, like, government, like, conspiracy theorist. I just, like I say, the show's real and it's raw. And the stuff that I talk about is real. The stuff that you're talking about is real. And the government really does these things to people. They really will send you to prison for 120 years when there's no violence. You know, even innocent people go to prison all the time. As crazy as that might sound.
It's not crazy to me anymore. I think obviously it's the first time it happened to me. So I was naive in my understanding, and it's funny, a lot of people attack me saying, oh, the only reason I care about criminal justice or prison reform is because of Keith. And the reality is, in part, it's true. Like, I wouldn't have known what I now know had I not been personally affected. I mean, maybe I would have come to it in some way because I've always been interested in justice issues and civil rights, but that doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, I talk to dozens of people in prison across the country all the time. All I do is spend my time trying to bring attention to wrongs and how the reality of how it works, because I know I was in the dark and I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through. And so it's frustrating and it's unfortunate, because I think for most people that's the case. They don't know until it happens to them.
That's almost always the case. Let me tell you something that Gandhi said, right? He said, don't let people with dirty feet run through your mind. It doesn't matter how you got to the boxing ring. It matters that you're in the fight.
Totally. Absolutely. And I don't. I just think, the illogic of so many people just being hateful and wanting to discredit, when you're speaking the truth. Because I think the truth in our country, what's going on, and it's not new, obviously, this history is as old as time, but it's very uncomfortable for people to reckon with the fact that our government is run by tyrants who don't care about their rights, who don't care about their well-being, don't care about the truth or justice. Like, the reality of that is, I'd rather believe that that's not true. So unless I'm being directly threatened, I can understand why people would get a bad feeling when someone's trying to tell them that. And that's what I do. Like, you've seen me on Twitter. I'm trying to tell people how it really is. And people are like, no, you're in a cult. And I'm like, okay, but it's still true, So
you also talked about, like, the prosecutors, and this is what people also don't understand. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart, because I've seen it. They're wicked. I feel like they teach these people how to have no compassion, no empathy for others, because their job is they take an oath to seek justice. And it seems like in their minds that their justice is and I'm going to share a personal experience with you, their justice is to hammer you as much as they can, send you to prison for as long as they can, and they just want to be the winners. And I say that because of this, Nicki. I was 24 years old. My mother had been through a lot of stuff in her life. My brother had committed suicide. I went to trial. I was convicted. And on my sentence, the first time I seen it is they brought all the law clerks down when the jury was read. And they actually were high-fiving each other when they said that I was guilty. Like, they're like, yeah, we got it. Like it was a basketball game. And then my mother's sitting there, right? And they sentenced me. They sentenced me to 40 years. I'm 24 years old. You give me a 40-year sentence. And there were people in there from the prosecutor's office that were happy. And I had mentioned to the judge, I said, this isn't a Christmas party. This isn't a graduation party where everybody should be happy. I don't understand how a human being could sit in the stands and be happy that you're giving someone 40 years when my mother's sitting there crying, and my sister, my family members. Because, Nicki, I've been in some bad prisons. I've done some bad things in my life in the beginning of my journey. I was in a the most dangerous prison, perhaps maybe in the country, right? Definitely the most dangerous federal prison. I was in USP Big Sandy. I wasn't always a nice guy. I went in there angry. 24, I was always a big kid. People were killing each other in there.
Yeah.
And, you know, I went in there and it hardens your heart. But you know what? I still had compassion, empathy. I would see someone get stabbed and I was serving a 40-year sentence and I would feel bad inside. But yet these people can cheer about someone getting a life sentence. I mean, this is...
And they're supposedly the heroes or the good guys. It's absolutely backwards. And I had the exact same experience. I actually didn't even know until I watched part of the documentary, The Vow, that is supposedly about this story, but it's a very one-sided kind of... has a specific agenda that it wants to achieve with how they tell the story. Anyway, what the part it shows people who were my former friends and how they all conspired to create this story and the narrative and everything like that, and then how they all reacted when Keith got taken in Mexico and when the news came out, and they were celebrating, like high-fiving each other, hugging each other, laughing. It was so sick. And I'm with you. Like, there is no day on this planet that a person going to prison is a happy day. I don't care if they're a stone cold killer. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that that person did that for whatever their motivation was. It's a tragedy on every level. That doesn't mean they don't deserve to be there. That doesn't mean there aren't people who should be in prison. But it's a somber event. It's a sad thing that these things happen, and I just really don't understand it myself. So I'm sorry for you, for your mom, for seeing it and experiencing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks, but you know what? It made me who I am today, and that's why, you know, I've got over 100 men and women out of prison. While I was in prison, I taught over 100 men how to read and write. And I mean that literally.
Incredible.
That was my mission. And that was because they made me dislike them, the government,
Right.
so much that was my motivation every day.
You were going to prove them wrong.
And not only prove them wrong, but I was going to beat them. And I've beaten them numerous times in the courtroom. And, you know, I was just some white kid from the ghetto that was a crack dealer. But you know what? I educated myself in there and I became who I am today. And you know what? Might sound crazy to some people, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I deserve to go to prison, but I didn't deserve a 40-year sentence. But this isn't about me. It's about you today.
I can relate to that. I mean, I wouldn't trade anything that I've been through for anything. And I think it's a tragedy what's happened to people that I care about. But I'm grateful too, because I feel like we have an opportunity to expose, because we have this spotlight, for better or for worse. People are obsessed with this story. You know, anything that happens, it's all over the news. And when the truth comes out, it's going to be explosive. People are hopefully finally going to see that something that they believed so, you know, they were so committed to, like, Keith's a monster. And look, there are people who are going to believe that forever, because some people just will never change their minds, and that's fine. But anyone who is willing to look at evidence, at real information, you know, see the corruption, see the injustice, I think it's going to be a perceptual shift for a lot of people, because so many have bought into the narrative.
There's someone else that was affected that's very close to you in this case too, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us who that person is?
Well, I mean, I was close to everybody in this case and who was indicted, but of course Allison Mack, who is technically still my wife, although she sent divorce papers in December, which I found out about thanks to Fox News. Like, I just, yeah, another day in this surreal life. And it's, again, it's a tragedy on so many levels, because I read her sentencing memo and all the ways that she is making amends for something that I know isn't true. And I understand that it's what she has to do given the position she's in and the plea that she took. I mean, she ended up getting 3 years with guidelines of 14 to 17. So that tells you how significant it was that she disavowed anyone and anything to do with NXIVM, with Keith, and obviously that includes me. So
She ended up pleading guilty. She didn't go to trial, correct?
yeah, correct. All Keith's co-defendants took plea deals.
Was Allison forced to testify at the trial or anything like that, or no?
She didn't actually. She didn't testify. Lauren Salzman, who I was referring to earlier, was a very close friend, and she did testify. And she's going to be sentenced tomorrow, actually. So it'll be interesting to see the disparity of that as well.
So now, this affected you personally. I mean, obviously, it affected your whole life, right? I mean, it affected your career, the media. Let's take that route. The media. I mean, they kind of destroyed you in the media a little bit, didn't they?
They did. Not as bad as Allison, and in large part, that's why I haven't spoken about her at all, really, because I just feel like she was terrorized so much, so unfairly, never given an opportunity to defend herself or for anyone else to defend her, because it was such a, kind of nuclear issue. And people that she trusted, people who she counted as her friends, completely betrayed her and used her to make themselves famous or get attention. It's disgusting. But, so I was written about negatively, like I said, not to the degree that she was, and certainly not Keith, for a while, but it didn't affect me so much. I'm not, it's not like I got stopped on the street and, people threw eggs at me or anything like that. It did affect my work, where I was running a business, and once people found out who I was or what they read about me in the media, like a bunch of them quit and they went to the media, and that was a really hard thing. But it really hasn't been since I came out publicly in support of investigating the due process issues in Keith's case and speaking more of what I know about the situation that I've really kind of gotten more negative attacks and hate and attention and things like that. And also since a couple so-called documentaries have come out that I've been in. They didn't ask permission. I didn't get paid. Like, I wasn't part of them at all, but they featured my image, my likeness, and things like that. So it's been difficult because people are deciding who I am without finding out the truth. But I did get to a point, I was really afraid to speak because of the legal threats. And the prosecution threatened me, they threatened friends. My friend was going to do a speech on tolerance and character assassination. The prosecution literally told him that if he did it, he would get arrested because he's part of, our community. And they thought he might be speaking positively about Keith. So that's still a real threat, but I did get to a point where I decided that I don't want to live in a country, I don't want to live in a world where I'm driven by fear and silenced by the threat of tyrants. So there may be further consequences to my speaking out, but I've come to terms with that, and it's more important for the truth to be known.
Well, I sure hope that there are no consequences for you. And your wife, she also was a Hollywood actress, right?
Yeah, she was on the show Smallville.
So you guys have no communication at all?
No. So, February 2019 was the last time I saw her due to the RICO and just the really disproportionate punishment and bail conditions and things like that. She wasn't allowed to speak to anyone unless she was with legal counsel and with everybody, so my lawyers and her lawyers would have to be there to see each other. And
even though you're legally married to her.
Yeah, it's pretty unprecedented. Yeah. So, but then once she started talking to the government, then I didn't speak to her after that. So I haven't had any contact or communication since then.
Hurtful still?
Yeah, it's kind of an impossible thing to process. It's such a tremendous loss, but she's still alive. Like it's not like she's dead, but I also think she's not the person that she was in many ways. And she's made decisions, and I don't know how she's justified them or what's gone on internally for her. And, I still care about her deeply and just want her to be okay. I don't think she deserves to spend a single day in prison. I don't think she deserves any of what's happened. I know that she's a very strong person and she'll make the best of it, but it doesn't make it right.
Oh, I understand. Believe me, I've been there. I was married. I got a 40-year sentence and I was married, and my wife had to go on with her life, and things, hey, believe me, I know what you're going through, and sometimes things end and you can't talk, and you're just like, you're left like always wondering, like, well, all right, well, what about this, or what about that? So I definitely could feel your pain. What are you doing with your life now?
Yeah. Well, definitely more of this, meaning talking about what I've experienced and the broader issues that it exposes. Something, that was very special to me that's been distorted by the media is a movement that I started back in July 2020, so about a year ago. I actually had tried to volunteer with 2 different organizations that worked inside prisons. I really felt compelled and drawn to help people in prison. My background is with, coaching and helping people. And now I'm learning about the inhumane treatment, everything that's going on. And I just felt like, oh my God, with what I know and just the endless well of compassion that I have, I felt like that's what I want to do. So I trained to teach yoga in prison, and also to teach classes in public speaking and goal setting, introspection, and kind of like resume stuff too. But COVID happened. Like right when I was getting approved and everything to go in the prisons, COVID happened. And as you know, prisons went on lockdown. People were in their, bathrooms essentially for 24/7, and it was awful. Some friends and I went to MDC Brooklyn, which has a parking lot outside that for the part of the building where people have windows that face the parking lot, they can see down and see the people outside.
I've been there.
And have you been there? Okay. So you're familiar with the setup, and the windows are very narrow and dirty, but I imagine they're the one way to kind of feel like there's outside life and know what's going on. So one day I went there with a couple of friends to try to see Keith at his window and just wave, and I hadn't visited him anyway because I was still concerned with what they might do to me. But we went and we waved. And I have this joke with Keith where like I do moonwalks, like it's like a party trick, right? And he's really good at it too. He can do it like sideways and forwards and backwards. Yeah. So I'm outside the prison and I do a moonwalk, and guys start like banging on their windows. Yeah. Like they use their combination lock and start banging on the windows, and they started flashing their lights, and I was kind of touched. I was thinking, wow, they've been locked in. This is probably the first time they've seen some sort of just trivial human expression, like something that's just kind of fun. So one thing led to another. I turned on the car stereo and started dancing and put on a show. Nothing, fully clothed, fully PG-13, like just dancing, just having fun. And it was so moving. Like more and more people kept coming to their windows and waving and flashing their reading lights. And it was a really moving experience. And I was like, you know what? I think this is a good idea. So the next day I brought more friends and more friends and more friends. And we started a movement called the Forgotten Ones to bring entertainment, just levity, a break, escape for the guys inside. We ended up putting up a phone number so that they could tell their friends and family to call us and join us. And of course, I started getting phone calls from the guys inside. I started talking to their wives, their kids, and bringing people out.
Let me tell you something, like I said, I spent almost 18 years of my life, and there's stuff like that. It does trigger people, and it makes you say, damn, man. Sometimes there would be people that would come to the jails and sing for Christmas, and small things like that make you say, man, there's still, people are still human, man. There are people that still care about us. And you brought joy to their day. And I'm sure they looked forward to it. Was Keith able to see that?
So interestingly, he sent an email 2 days after we started coming to a friend saying he was supportive and said it was boosting morale. He's like, you should start a not-for-profit and do this at more prisons. Like, this is great. So he was encouraging it, and he immediately got moved to a cell where he couldn't see anything, where it was just facing a wall.
Of course he did. Even now, Keith's going through some stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's crazy because, the media, we wanted to bring attention and get more people to come. And the media came and twisted the whole story once again. They made it that sex cult members were dancing for their leader. And like I said, Keith wasn't even there. We showed up every single night for 3 weeks. And then we were like, okay, this isn't maybe totally sustainable. So then we did it every single Friday for over 6 months. We started a website, an Instagram. We did live streams. So like sometimes wives who were in other cities or states would tune in, and we'd like find where their husband was in the window and make sure that they could see them. And it was a beautiful, really impactful thing. I still get messages from guys who've since been released, and they'll find our Instagram and say, I was on the 7th floor. I waited for you guys every night. Like, thank you so much. You just made that time bearable.
You put some light in a dark place, and people, I'm sure, appreciated it. And even though I wasn't there, I can tell you, man, that I appreciate what you did. Because small things matter.
I would do it all the time if I could. Like, I still go there sometimes on my own, and just there's some people that I still know there, and I'll wave or just dance a little bit just to let them know, like, I'm still thinking about them, even though we don't have a formal dance party.
You're also from Canada, right? Am I right in that?
Yeah.
I think you just want to go there and just be done with this stuff?
Never.
Never?
I feel so purposeful in this. I feel strong. I feel like I'm in this situation and position for a reason. I feel a moral obligation to stand up for what's right, to stand up for people who don't have a voice, to stand up for my friends, for people I love, and for people who are going through the same thing who don't have someone on their side. So I would, there are a lot of people who ask me that question, including my mother, and I feel for her. The hardest part about what I've chosen and what I continue to choose is how it affects people who just want me to be okay. They just want me to not get attacked or arrested, certainly, or just go through all of this. And it's hard, and I wish I could take away that worry. Unfortunately, it's just not in me. It's not in me to give up in that way.
Well, I mean, that says a lot about your character, right? Because so many people do give up, and it'd probably be much easier for you to leave and go back home and, put this stuff behind you. But, I mean, you have a purpose. We all have a purpose. Yeah. And, and I can say this from my point of view that, what you're doing is important. It's appreciated. It's appreciated by more people than you could ever imagine, not just Keith, but other people, because you do have a voice. You have a platform. You were in Hollywood, and the things that you've done, people listen to you. They listen to you a little bit more than they might listen to me, or listen to someone that just got out of prison. So you are appreciated, and there is an agenda. And I'm a firm believer that there has to be consequences for actions, right? I believe that. But you don't send people to prison, for nonviolence for 120 years. You don't take a 24-year-old and send them to prison for 40 years. You don't take, I write for Criminal Legal News and Prisoners Legal News. And I used to write about this kid named Jamal Azell. He was 19 years old. He robbed a bunch of Domino's pizzas. He made some irrational, irresponsible choices. And he was sentenced to like 150 years. And the judge told the prosecutor, he said, you really want to do this? You really want to charge him with stacked 924Cs? Same thing that I went to prison for. And the prosecutor said, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. And years later, the judge said, I don't want to do this to this kid. Will you open the case and let me, resentence him? Prosecutor said no. And then the First Step Act came. And I can tell you, after I believe 22 years, Jamal Azell, now the judge had the authority to release him, and the judge did so. So he got a second chance. But you don't take 19-year-olds.
But how many don't? That's a great story, and I'm glad. And that's the thing that really bothers me, kind of similar to what we were saying about sending people to prison. When people are exonerated who were sent to prison wrongfully because they were innocent, I see all these stories where people are patting each other on the back and celebrating. And of course, it's an incredible moment for them to have their freedom. But why are we not angry as hell that it happened? How is this okay? How are we not looking at every single conviction and saying, wait, we need to make sure that there's nobody in prison who's innocent? And I would go so far as to say that I think most people in prison, whether they committed crimes or not, were prosecuted wrongfully because of how plea negotiations work, because of sentencing and everything like that. It's not about just guilt or innocence. It's, do you deserve what you're there for? Are you there for the thing that you pled to? It's so messed up. Don't get me started. But that's why we're here, right?
Well, we tell the public, right? Like in federal court, a judge has to sentence you, and he has to do it under 18 U.S.C. 3553A. And in there, Congress has said that the punishment must be sufficient, but not greater to achieve the goals of sentencing. And if those goals of sentencing, part of them are rehabilitation, how do you take a guy and give him 120 years and say, hey, this is a punishment that's sufficient but not greater than necessary? Go ahead and rehabilitate yourself. Rehabilitate himself. No. And I'm not just talking about Keith. I'm talking about people like Jamal Azell.
Sure. Absolutely.
Obviously, in 20 years, he rehabilitated himself. The judge released him. But had the law not changed, then the rehabilitation was totally out the window because he was never going to get out anyway. He had 130 years. So we can't tell the public that our system is a fair system. And, and here you go. I'm going to give you something while I'm saying this because I want to say it. Like, I seen Marco Rubio speak out during the presidential election about, how about Cuba and Castro, because I think he was Cuban, and how nasty Castro was, which I agree there was a lot of bad things going on. But how can we talk about the human rights violations when it comes to Castro when you're doing the same thing here and you're a senator? You're the one that's helping pass these laws.
That's the thing that I think is actually even more insidious about this country, is that it operates under the veil of honesty and justice. Other countries, at least, are honest about the fact that they're corrupt. Like Mexico, that you're not getting a fair deal, that it's run on bribery and politics and things like that. But, the government purports that we have a system of law and order, and the reality is that we don't. And I think that's the thing that needs to be exposed and needs to be addressed. Whether people change or not, they need to know what they're dealing with.
Well, they say, sometimes you hear people say, well, our system's the best in the world. It's not perfect, but it's the best in the world. And you know what that is? That's nonsense. That's propaganda. No. That's bullshit.
97% conviction rate. Do you know how shameful that is? That doesn't mean they always catch the bad guys. That's not what that means. That means they're able to basically prosecute and convict whoever they want.
And they can force you and say, hey, listen, if you don't tell on this guy, we're going to give you a life sentence. Mm-hmm. So you better come in here. You better tell on this cat. You better say what we want you to say. And when they sit in those meetings, because I had it happen with my co-defendants that testified on me, I'm sure in those meetings they're like, well, this is how it really happened, right? Instead of you telling them what happened, they're telling you this is how it really
Well,
happened.
that's actually exactly what happened to the people who went in for proffer sessions in our case. Like I said, DOS was kind of at the center because
You got your lawyer cap on today.
Well, yes, but so and I'm very fortunate that I had a great lawyer who didn't let me go in because they wouldn't offer me any type of immunity. But I have friends who went in and they just got bullied. Like my friends were like, no, I chose no, that wasn't bad, that wasn't abusive. And they're like, but weren't you afraid the whole time that your collateral is going to be released? And they were like, no, that wasn't the purpose of it, that's not what it was, these were my friends. And the prosecution was so angry that they wouldn't say what they wanted them to say, to the point where they threatened them. So yeah, people just don't realize. And to your point about, yes, there needs to be consequences for actions, but that works both ways. Prosecutors and judges can't just lie and get away with it. They can't make up evidence, they can't suppress evidence, they can't break the law to convict someone, and even if it's found out 10 years later, oh oops, that's not okay.
It's definitely not. How many people have we killed that were innocent on death row? It happens.
Not right.
I mean, the John Grisham book, what was it, The Innocent Man? Look at that guy, spent 30 years in prison. He was a phenomenal baseball player, could have been playing with the Yankees, and he could have died on death row. He got out, but he ended up dying anyway from, I think, Lou Gehrig's disease. So he spent 30 years of his life sitting in a cell, wondering if he was going to die, if he was going to be killed by the government for a crime that he had not committed. Happens all the time, unfortunately. So, Nicki, before we close this show, is there anything you want to say to the people or to the public?
I think the only thing that we haven't touched on that I feel strongly about, even though in my case I'm standing for having the trial and the due process violations being investigated, and I believe that everyone is innocent. Well, I believe that the people who are convicted are innocent. I think there might be criminals involved, but that's another story. But even people who have committed crimes, even people who are sent to prison because they did break the law, to me, deserve compassion, deserve to be treated as human beings. And I know there's a lot of people out there who say, oh, you do the crime, you do the time, or they have an idea of what a criminal is. And a criminal is your neighbor, is your cousin, is the person you went to school with. There's no island that breeds criminals. People make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are incredibly destructive and harmful, and there needs to be consequences. And sometimes those consequences do lead to rehabilitation. In my opinion, people are rehabilitated in prison despite the conditions, not because of them, but it happens. And I just, that's a message that I feel very strongly. In addition to changing the way people end up in prison, I want to change the way people are viewed who are in prison, who have been to prison, and just encourage people to have some humanity, because you just never know what can happen to you or someone you love.
I mean, that's big, right? Have some humanity. Yeah. Unfortunately, so many cops in prison and prosecutors, there is no compassion, no humanity, no empathy. They just think they're doing a job. And I didn't grow up like that. I grew up with, a loving family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Spent Christmases together, Thanksgivings, and we always were taught to have empathy for other people, man, and to care. Yeah. And these people have none. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you. We could probably do a part 2. I think there's a lot more to talk about.
There's a lot, and I appreciate everything that you're doing, and from legal work to educating and giving people a voice who wouldn't have one otherwise.
Well, I appreciate you, and you're giving me probably a bigger platform now and a bigger voice. And like I said, it isn't about, I don't do this for money. I do this because I care, because I know what it's like to go to bed hungry at night. I know what it's like to not have justice. I know what it's like to have your Fourth Amendment rights violated and the judge to toss them in the trash. like you never had them anyway. So, and I hope the best for you, and anything I can do for you, I promise you, on the BOP level or anything you need with the law, anything like that, definitely reach out to me because I'm here to help you as well. So with that, I'll close the show. Tell everybody, man, Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Thankful for Nicki. Hit the subscribe button, share the video, leave some comments. I'm sure Nicki could check them out and respond. Let's all be respectful and understand that maybe if you feel one way about this, go do some research. You might be surprised. And with that, we're out until tomorrow.